they keep assuming that AI is going to be that talent challenge, but in the portfolio companies I've been at up close, that's not the bottleneck. The bottleneck is that data plumbing. Outside engineers can try to stitch those systems together and they can be very helpful, but at the end of the day, the operators have to own those calls.
Excited for today's episode, reconnecting with David. Known David for quite some time. We chat all things AI, especially in this new age and what CDOs are thinking about. So really excited for today's episode. Welcome to another episode of AI in Commerce with Noivo. Today we have David Levin, who's currently an acting chief digital officer at kleinberg. Welcome, David.
Hey, good to see you, Kailin.
Awesome. All right, David, kick us off. Tell us about your career journey. You've done some mighty impressive things, so start from the beginning.
Yeah, I think the TLDR on me is that I like to build things, and I like to build things that create value for companies. Like putting numbers on the scoreboard is the fun part of, I think, why I fell in love with digital in the first place. Typically, when I get brought into a company, it's when they know that digital should be a bigger part of their strategy and their future, but they just either don't know or can't get there. And so there's two problems that I'm usually trying to solve, but I'll give you one for example today. The customer experience, right? The customer should experience one company, but the company is operating on 5 different organizations, right? The website team is different and operating differently than the store team. The customer service is fragmented from all of that. And each of these teams have their own data, their own definition of what the customer is, their own metrics, and what a good day looks like. And that can be a real problem. And so I started my career on the agency side of all this. Spent about 20 years on digital agencies. I sold my digital agency to 360i, which we later sold to Dentsu. I then stayed a few years and then went and founded my own SaaS company, and I sold that. And then I spent 7 years transforming and helping grow Bob's Discount Furniture. I joined when the company was about $1 billion, backed by Bain Capital, and helped grow it to about $2 billion prior to its IPO that happened recently. And like you said, I'm currently consulting for a few companies, one of which is kleinberg, which has been a lot of fun.
That's pretty crazy, man. So 2 IPOs, 5 exits, an MBO. Yeah, like when you're walking into these businesses for the first time, like how did you know, for example, at Bob's that like digital would be a growth lever? How are you assessing like if you're able to really drive that much growth through digital?
Yeah, I think the good thing in my career is I've been fortunate enough to be on both sides of the equation. I've looked at buying companies and been on the buy side, and I've been bought. And it's taught me that there's 3 things to look at, and one of them is not the website. First, can the company and the brand know and tell me what their customer is worth? Not the revenue that they get from the customer, but what a customer is worth over time. That lifetime value is critical, and whether that is different for customers acquired through different channels and through different ways. If nobody can answer that right away, digital isn't yet a growth lever. We're not ready. Because what it really is at that point is it's just a cost center that looks great on a dashboard. It's also the quickest diagnosis that I can do when I'm looking at a company or an opportunity, because you learn it in the first meeting. If they can't answer the question, you know exactly where they're sitting from a maturation standpoint. The second thing I look at is, where does the margin actually live? So some businesses have real headroom to invest in acquisition, but other businesses don't. And at Bob's, the repeat curve really told us everything. We were really unclear how often people were buying furniture. So the first thing we did was model that repeat curve. And what we found was that 11% of new customers would repeat within the first 3 months, 24% within the first 2 years, and it went up to about 33% of customers would repeat within 5. But the most important number that I think we identified early that really helped us think through a go-to-market strategy was that the 3-month number, that 3-month repeat rate, was like a leading indicator for us of a reliable number to tell us what the 12-month number was going to be. So at the time, I think our 12-month repeat rate was around 16.5%. It would give or take a tenth of a point. And we modeled that every single point that we could increase was worth about $2.4 million in incremental annual sales. So we were able to set targets of how could we improve that 3-month and 6-month repeat rate to drive up that 12-month repeat rate, and then ultimately that 5-year repeat rate. And the third is who owns it. So what I look at, and I looked at Bob's, and it was why I came in and we built a customer experience and digital transformation kind of specialization or center of excellence there, was who actually owns it within the company, right? Not who sponsors it, but who actually owns it. And for me, that's the thing that kills most programs is you can talk all day long of we're going to grow digital, we're going to invest in this, we're going to do this. But at the end of the day, if nobody actually owns it and nobody makes the decision of whether the program was successful and should be killed or not, you can't actually succeed and you can't start really scaling digital as a lever.
Out of curiosity, what brought you from founding and selling companies to joining like a pretty established business? Like $1 billion revenue business is pretty established.
It's a great question. One of my favorite mentors and business partners said to me once, as you get older, you get more risk averse, fear to start another business. And so as I get older and want to spend more time with my kids, it's harder and harder to go start a new business. So I realized that I had a sense of this crystallized knowledge of what works and the playbooks that work. And they were just as applicable. Maybe the orders of magnitude were different and certain things matter more, like governance in a larger business. But being able to apply those things was a huge opportunity. And so I just kind of moved up and continued to scale what I had learned into larger and larger businesses with each move.
If you're listening to the e-commerce toolbox, you're entitled to a podcast exclusive website audit. Go to noibu.com/podcast-audit for a free scan that uncovers the hidden friction blocking your conversions and shows you where you're leaking revenue.
Talk to us a bit about, you recently wrote that private equity is spending like billions of dollars to embed AI engineers across portfolio companies. And I mean, cost of capital has gone up. So it's kind of like decrease costs, increase targets, implement AI. That's what every PE firm is kind of pushing right now. Talk to us a bit about why you think that's potentially the wrong bottleneck.
For me, you can buy talent within a quarter, right? You can go out and hire great IA engineers. But what you can't do is make sure that your data layer is ready, that your team is willing, and that you have the right exec empowered to make sure the deployment succeeds and has actually seen one that's failed, right? Because if they haven't seen one that's failed, then what you have is someone who really can't judge what's working and not working in real time and make corrections. Just to give you some background here. So as you were talking about, Anthropic announced a $1.5 billion venture with Blackstone, Apollo, Goldman, and General Electric and others. OpenAI then launched a $4 billion deployment arm that's backed by TPG, my old friends at Bain Capital, Brookfield, Advent. They keep assuming that AI is going to be that talent challenge, but in the portfolio companies I've been at up close, that's not the bottleneck. The bottleneck is that data plumbing that I was talking about. 3 definitions of customer living across 5 different systems. Outside engineers can try to stitch those systems together and they can be very helpful, but at the end of the day, the operators have to own those calls. And if they're not ready yet to own those calls, that's going to be your first bottleneck. The second one is, and it's kind of related, is change management. The team has to want to do this change. And so if the analyst has been running their data models manually for a decade, the new way is a fight, not necessarily a deployment call. And then the last piece of this is, like I was talking about earlier, it's an exec team that really can tell the difference between a demo and a deployment. Because I've seen so many exec teams walk into a meeting with the CEO, show a curated set of data that's been cleansed and it's perfect. And the CEO walks out and it's like, this is going to work. But where the reality meets the road is at 2 a.m. when your analyst is tired and you find a weird edge case and the whole data model breaks. That's where it all falls apart. That's what I think you really need experienced people on the operating team to make those things work.
Man, this is a really interesting insight, especially when we're starting to talk in the context of e-com, because a lot of retail, especially the retail's retail, right? It's very correlated to like consumer sentiment and GDP. And when there's inflation in your basket of goods, like you're probably going to stretch those jeans out a bit longer before getting an extra pair. So there's a lot of like interesting macro factors when it comes to commerce. And then we're still seeing some of the unwinding, especially where D2C businesses were being treated like tech companies for a little bit. So there's a lot of, at least a lot of our customers and prospects that are either owned by PE, they had investment, and it's kind of a lot of the same talk tracks. It's cut your team or cut your OpEx, drop your OpEx now for the fourth year in a row by 10%, 15%, depending on how far you have to cut. Stop spending so much on ads, grow your LTV, drop your CAC, implement AI, do more with less. So it's kind of, everyone's kind of hearing the same thing, right?
Do more with less, all at once, everywhere.
While growing your targets year over year, right?
Yes.
And the thing I don't envy, I mean, you had a SaaS company. The thing I don't envy about retail is come Jan 1, you're at zero. And like, that's not the case with SaaS, right? Like you maybe lose 10% of your revenue, you know what I mean? Year over year or whatever, 5%. So you start the year kind of 5-10% in the hole. But starting the year at zero is a completely different beast. So it's very interesting. And I guess where I was going kind of with all of this is, when it comes to data plumbing, like, do you think you can build autonomous AI agents, which is kind of the future everyone's trying to get to? Everyone's trying to build an AI agent to automatically go through their customer support tickets, to solve their bugs, to make their site faster, to investigate customer friction. Like, everyone wants to do this. Like, how important is the data layer? And is that almost such an obvious that it's a redundant question? But yeah, I'm curious, especially given your kind of experience and how you're now consulting with these businesses.
It's a great question. I'd push back a little bit on the premise, just slightly, in that they're both important. They're not necessarily sequential. So the data layer I could talk about for hours, how critical it is to stitch your data together and have a single view of customer, a single view of product, so that your AI, but also your teams are all aligned around a single source of truth, right? It is critical. That said, you don't have to finish that data layer to start working in AI. And so it's really about knowing where the bodies are buried when you start. Because otherwise you'd never start, because the data layer is a journey, just like everything is a journey in retail. And so what I would do, and I would recommend to any of the operators listening to your podcast, is pick a use case where the data is clean enough, ship that use case, and use the win to fund the plumbing for the next one, versus waiting to get the plumbing right. At Bob's, the clean enough thing for us was delivery scheduling. And it was also a need. This was during COVID. Stores closed for a while, right? We all went into our homes and didn't leave. And everyone from a data perspective agreed generally what a successful delivery was and what it meant. So there was no real core definitional fight from a data plumbing perspective. And we could work with one system, which was a delivery scheduling system, and build a self-serve AI agent that could actually handle that delivery scheduling without you having to call us like the old legacy model in furniture. And so that was where we sort of started. And that credibility allowed us to get even more advanced with customer support and other use case handling from there.
Do you see, whether it's in companies you've worked at or in companies you're consulting with, call it like the apprehension around AI, depending on how your team is structured? So for example, like if you're super marketing heavy, then maybe you want to lean in there less. If you're super engineering light, you're okay to lean there more, and then kind of vice versa. Like, have you seen that dynamic play out at all?
Yeah, it's different in different scenarios. I think one thing you need to know, and it comes down to casting and how you put your team together from a RACI perspective, is if you're light in engineering, can you go out and buy those engineers? So in our use cases at Bob's, the engineers for SAP in our internal delivery scheduling systems were strong, but our AI engineers, we didn't invest in those. So that's where we went out and bought that through a SaaS provider and their professional services team. So their PS teams could do the implementation, and our teams could focus on what we're good at, is just knowing our internal systems. And from the business side, knowing the customer experience target that we were going for as far as how we wanted this to feel and what was the amount of time we wanted you to spend. It had to be, we wanted really less than 2 minutes to schedule or reschedule a delivery. That was our target. And so we were able to go out and cast for where we were weak to get that across the line.
Talk to me a bit more about at Bob's, you led a generative AI strategy for customer service and workflows. You guys cut millions in costs. Talk to me a bit about where you guys were kind of drawing the line in terms of what you wanted the system to do, what you still wanted heavy human involvement on. I know that that's something that a lot of people are kind of struggling with right now is how much of the wheel do they hand over?
Yeah. And I think what you're really getting at with that question is governance, right? And it, especially in large companies, when you think about handing the keys to the car and saying, hey, AI agent, go drive my car, you're worried about what it's going to do from a customer support and service perspective. So to me, at a system level, at an organization of the size of Bob's, what we decided was the model could understand what a customer was asking, could use large language models to really comprehend. But what we found was that it could not invent the answers, because if we allowed it to do that, we were getting into real challenges. And I'll get specific and double click on this for you. But the governing guardrail for us was understand, not invent. And so here's how this worked. When we allowed it to generate its own answer to a customer facing question, and these were in the early days of AI, it's getting better and better. But this is also, I think, a great lesson of how you can step your way in and still test significant, because I'll talk about the return on investment that we got from this, test sort of how you create change without maybe giving over the keys fully. What we found was that when we tested the generative content with like 5,000 store associates, and that's how we tested it before we put it in market, we had an internal population with real stakes, and we weren't just testing a QA script. We allowed it to sort of embarrass itself in front of the associates, and we found out for free where it wasn't working, where it was. What we found was that it would hallucinate answers that didn't show up in our demo testing. And so here's an example. We would ask it the questions that a marketing person would ask, but not the simple question that you ask when you're tired and frustrated or having typos, because you're typing quickly. And so a salesperson asked it, what are the discounts available on Labor Day? Well, if you know Bob's Discount Furniture, it's an everyday low price retailer. There are no sales. The AI invented an entire answer out of thin air.
Like promotional calendar and everything.
And it invented a full promotional calendar. So we immediately said, we are not ready to give it that level or manage that level of governance. So we pulled it back and said, it can understand the question, but it can only suggest and write written approved answers directly. And we did that, and it still removed and deflected about 35% of all questions coming in, which is where we got that $4 million a year out of operating costs that you were quoting, which continued to scale as the store count grew.
That makes a lot of sense. There was actually a pretty famous case in Canada with Air Canada, where the AI putting up a refund and they had to honor it, right? And it was just completely like out of thin air. It was in no FAQ, no training. So no, that's definitely a thing. And obviously with AI getting more and more, like honestly, just the model's getting better. Hopefully those things will decrease over time. And David, as we're looking to wrap up, like if you were to give one piece of advice to CDOs in 2026, especially those interested in implementing AI and those that have all the same pressures we were just discussing, like what would you say?
Look, like any technology, I would say it starts with the problem statement, and you should always still be looking at what is the core KPI you're looking to inflect. That's number one. And then second, where are you comfortable and not comfortable using AI to inflect that change? And how far are you willing to go? And then really have smart conversations with internal and external experts in AI about how could you achieve this while mitigating risk? I mean, if full stop for me, that's the key. And I think that's, once we figured out we could still just use the interpret model, right? As the example we were just talking about. Once we figured out we could go there, so at least the customer could talk in a very free-flowing way, in a very human way, and then the bot would respond with very specific text, but could at least repeat the question back that the person asked. We could show the customer we were listening and service them and reduce that risk. I think those are the two things you have to balance is how can you inflect the KPI and mitigate risk?
Makes sense. And I think a lot of your answers is really also, it's framed in the context of like enterprise, whereas we're seeing a lot of traction too, is a lot of SMBs didn't have the ability to implement these systems before AI. They didn't have the headcount, and now there's ways that they could effectively get the bulk of the outcome without having to hire massive teams around it.
Yeah, and the only difference there is the hallucination at a small scale is more painful because you have less customers that you have to get it right with. So it's actually more risk, if you can believe, at the SMB level to get it right. But you can execute at scale if you just think about what are the right guardrails and talk to your partner about that. We're running a pilot with you guys now. It's more on the analytics side, but it's going to move into the UX side. And I'm really excited to see what it can do. But this is at Kleinberg. This is a smaller business. And so what I'm excited about with this is getting it right will have huge impact for them. Getting it wrong will have greater downside. But I really believe it can do great things, what I'm seeing so far in the first few days of the pilot and what it can do on the analytics side. I can't wait till we get to the activation side with you guys.
100%. And David, it was nice reconnecting again and appreciate you taking the time today.
Thanks for having me on.
The e-commerce toolbox, AI in retail, is brought to you by Noivo. To find out more about Noivo and how we unify error monitoring, site performance, and experience analytics to uncover growth opportunities and skyrocket your revenue, visit www.noivo.com. That's Noibu.com. And then make sure to search for the e-commerce toolbox, AI in retail, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else podcasts are found, and click subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Noivo, thanks for listening.